If your Ford Focus is vibrating a lot, like you know the change in the ashtray rattles and you can feel tingling in your foot on the gas pedal, most likely it's your motor mounts. Here's where they're located. On the upper left, this is the split port single cam engine. So on the upper left is a hydraulic one. That means there's some hydraulic fluid in it rather than rubber. That one, if you replace it, you want to get the OEM part. I've heard that the aftermarket ones are terrible and don't last long at all. So it could be that motor mount. Could be there's one under the airbox. That's a rubber one. And then underneath the car towards the back of the engine, there's this sort of dog bone looking one right here. So in my case, if I go and take a look at that one, you can see that the rubber is starting to crack here. And if I get a pry bar, this crescent wrench in here, and I start to try to wiggle it, it wiggles real easy. You can see it rocking back and forth. So in my case, this is the problem. So I'm going to show you how to replace this one. The people on the internet say most likely it's that upper left one, the hydraulic one, that goes bad. So let's take it off and put it back on. This is an easy job. You just jack up the engine with put a block under it with a jack, and then we've got a bolt going through here that comes off, and then another one coming in here. All right, so these come out pretty easy. You will note that I have a jack on the car here, so I've jacked up underneath the transmission with some boards. Now, just undo these. 1, 2. Alright, next we need to remove the 3 bolts, 1, 2, 3, that hold this side bracket on. And that will allow us to get this thing out of here properly. So we take that side bracket off, and just slide the old mount out, and it's pretty thrashed. You can see if we look at the old one, the rubber is torn here and here, so that's definitely what was causing it to jump around. And we look at the new one, nice shiny rubber. Alright, so outside of the car, I've gone ahead and connected the bracket onto the stabilizer, and then I'm just going to slide the whole thing back onto the car in one move after that. Yeah, that works just like that. So just put the bolts back in. 1 bolt here, 3 bolts on this thing, and we're good to go. Alright, there she is, the new part, all torqued down except for this bolt. I'm going to take the weight off the engine and let it kind of lower down on here so that it doesn't get twisted, and then I'm going to tighten that up once I've lowered the jack. It's pretty tight, but it's not super tight. Now we'll see if my feet vibrate when I drive this thing. That's really all there is to it. You can be done with this in half an hour, really. It's real easy to do. To do the left motor mount, there's a nut here and a nut here. First you want to remove this tank, which is held on by this bolt. So you take this bolt out, remove the water tank, and just kind of move it over to the side. And then down here, there's a nut here and a nut here that need to be undone. And then you can see down there, right there, there's a bolt, and there are a couple other bolts that hold this piece of metal on. So you need to take this metal bracket off and then take these 2 nuts off to replace that one. The driver's side one is underneath the airbox. It's real easy to get to. You just unhook the electrics here and then sort of pop the airbox up. It's just pressure fitted into place like that. And then in here, there's your motor mount. So that one you just undo that nut, that nut, that nut, that nut, that nut, take it off, and then replace it with a new one. Of course, before you take it off, you need to put a jack underneath the oil pan. So a jack with a block of wood between the jack and the oil pan to hold the engine up while you remove this one. Alright, so I've gotten all 4 of the bottom bolts loose, and I'm working on the big one now. There it goes. So my recommendation would be to use a long wrench rather than a short one for leverage, because these were really tight. And a little bit of penetrating oil doesn't hurt either. Alright, so we pull that loose. Look down in the hole, and you can see that's where the middle part goes, and then the other 4 go around here. Right, you can see now that the bolt here is below the surface, so I'm going to have to jack up the engine to bring the bolt up into the hole here. And I've put these on almost tight. They're a little bit loose, so I can be able to shift the plate around if I need to once this goes through. Alright, I've got a jack under the oil pan side of the engine over there, and then I've got another jack with a block of wood underneath this side of the engine, under the transmission. So I'm going to jack up the transmission side, and you'll see the threads start to come up through this hole as I do. So I'm just going to lift it up until it's high enough for me to get a grip on it. Shift it around, make sure that that it's centered. And then I'll tighten these bolts down once I know that it's centered, and I'll put the big bolt in the middle. And while I'm doing this, I'm kind of trying to shake the engine to see if the other side feels shaky. And the other side feels pretty solidly mounted. Alright, so now I just put the big bolt on the middle, tighten these babies down, and remove the jacks. Let's take a look at the jacks. So here's what's going on under the car. The jack on the left is on the oil pan, and then on the right, that one's under the transmission. Both times I've used blocks of wood to protect the metal of the engine. And the one on the right is the one I've been jacking up to get the bolt through the threads. So the bolts are all tight. They look good, feel good. When we hook it back up, remember to hook up the airbox here, hook up the electrics, and then down here on the side of the airbox there's another hose that needs to be connected into the side of the airbox that popped loose when I pulled it out. So all three of those need to be done. Alright, that goes in easy. This goes back on. Tighten up the collar. So the bottom motor mount at the bottom of the engine is about 30 bucks. This one was around 30 bucks, and then the one on the other side is $44 if you buy the aftermarket one. If you buy the Ford one, it's around 100.